Welcome back. It is time for another edition of Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast covering the Las Vegas Raiders, the 8-9 Las Vegas Raiders. That's where they end up the 2023 season. Thanks for being with us on this Tuesday edition of the show. Scott Gulbransen, along with my partner Moe Moton. He is the senior NFL writer at Bleacher Report. You can also catch his Raiders column once a week up on sportsnot.com. You can also catch my written work on Sportsnot as well, where I cover the NFL and other stuff as it comes up, including the Raiders. So we appreciate you guys being with us. Of course, the Raiders 27-14 winners against the Denver Broncos. They make it 8 in a row over their division rivals and go out on a high note, which is good. And Mo, remember in the preseason, we predicted 7 wins, 8 wins, like a ceiling. And they come in with 8 wins, despite all the turmoil, despite firing their coach and GM midway through the year. The Raiders do dang good towards the end of the season. The offense is still broken. Let's not get dissuaded from addressing that because, yes, the offense did really well for once against the Broncos, but it still needs to be fixed. But you have to like the way this team rallied around one another. It reminded me of 2021, obviously for different reasons under Rich Bisaccia, but it was the same sort of feel where the big change comes, they get somebody in there who's much more of a player's coach, and they rally behind him and go out and play better football overall. They finish under Antonio Pierce with a record of 5-4. That, of course, brings up, Mo, that it's all about the coaching search right now. Of course, everybody that wants to see Antonio Pierce, there's lots of them, as the permanent head coach, feel like he's deserved it for what he's done over 9 games. They would like him coached today. Of course, we know, and I wrote a story up on Sportsnot about the Rooney Rule. You can't just hire him. Even though he's African-American, you can't just hire him. You have to go through the entire process, and that includes minority candidates outside the organization, not just inside the organization. So we'll let that process play out. But I want to start with this because it is an emotional hot button. If you heard our postgame show with Murph, he got into it a lot, and they were, of course, Raiders Fan Radio. They were fans. But Mo, when we look at the situation here, Antonio Pierce, I think, ended strongly. The Colts loss was a rough one, but he comes back home in front of the home crowd. They're chanting his name. And for some fans, it doesn't seem like there's any other option. What do you feel about this? And tell me a little bit about your assessment of where we are with Antonio Pierce.
I'll start off by saying I think he's earned strong consideration for the job. If it were me, you're asking for my head coaching list. I put this out on the X, I believe, last week. Jim Harbaugh would be my number 1 option. If Jim Harbaugh says and chooses another job or goes back to Michigan, today Antonio Pierce would be my second option, pending who he would hire as his offensive coordinator. I think people are glossing over this. His choice as an offensive coordinator is crucial because that offensive coordinator play caller is going to be responsible for the development of what I think is going to be a rookie quarterback that the Raiders will draft this offseason. So depending on who he wants to bring as his OC is going to tilt my decision one way or another.
Yeah.
Now, I mentioned that he brought in Adam Gase as a mentor. I guess you could say Bo Hardegree worked under Adam Gase, so it makes sense that he would bring in Adam Gase. But if he's thinking about running it back with Bo Hardegree and or bringing in Adam Gase as his permanent OC, I would be a bit worried about that combination. Simply because Adam Gase, after he parted ways with Peyton Manning, they were together in Denver. After that, he made stops in Miami, Chicago, and with the Jets. And none of Adam Gase's offenses were ranked 17th or higher in scoring or total yards per game. So if he mentions Adam Gase or Bo Hardegree, I may say I have to look somewhere else. Now, that may not be his choice. He may have just brought in Adam Gase to tutor mentor Bo Hardegree. So he may have his own option as an OC, whoever that may be. But that decision is going to be crucial. If not Antonio Pierce, if I don't like Antonio Pierce's offensive coordinator suggestion, then I open the net to guys like Frank Smith, Dave Canales, who's in Tampa Bay. Any offensive-minded potential head coach, simply because, again, it's going to be important for the Raiders to develop their quarterback. So Harbaugh, Antonio Pierce, Dave Canales, Frank Smith, another offensive mind that's available. And also a dark horse candidate would be Dan Quinn, because I know Dan Quinn can build a coaching staff. I want to reiterate this. Dan Quinn had Mike McDaniel, Kyle Shanahan, Raheem Morris. He had all those guys on the same staff. He has a track record and history of building quality coaching staffs, and that's what the Raiders need going into this. So that would be my list.
And very well said. And I think too, again, and you probably saw, and I was texting you because I engaged with a lot of people about this question. I did a video on game day about Jim Harbaugh and why I felt he would be the best choice. Now, we don't know if Jim Harbaugh wants to coach the Raiders. We don't know if the Raiders would hire Jim Harbaugh. We don't know if Jim Harbaugh's leaving Michigan. Now, I did a couple interviews last week where beat writers in Ann Arbor told me they believe he's gone. They believe no matter what happens, no matter what happened with the game on Monday, that he was going to leave. So we'll see if that happens based on what happened yesterday in the game. But I will tell you that it's interesting because, look, I have no problem with people saying, hey, look, I want Antonio Pierce as coach. I don't want anybody else. Here's the reasons why. To your point, I think that there's some nuances here because when you hire a head coach, and you touched on it, when you hire a head coach, you're not just hiring him, okay? You're hiring him to not only be the CEO of football. It doesn't matter. Yes, he can motivate guys. Yes, they love him. They want to play for him. That's awesome. And that's all true about Antonio Pierce. You can't argue with that because the players are speaking for themselves. But it comes down to also filling up a staff. And you say, well, he was a Super Bowl champion. He played for the Giants. How he'd be able to get a staff together quickly? Not so. It comes with coaching and experience. And I think that you have guys that are able to do it. I had somebody tell me that Jim Harbaugh couldn't do it. I was like, wait a minute. Do you understand that Jim Harbaugh's former defensive coordinator is now the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens, the best team in the NFL right now? Mike McDonald, right? Coached with him at Michigan. So the point is there's a lot of nuances here, and I got no problem with people wanting Antonio Pierce to be the coach, but that's based on what is the candidate pool. Some folks, including some folks in the media, and I know the players too, they spend time together in the locker room. He saved them from Josh McDaniels, for Christ's sake. So I get it. But you don't know who the candidate pool is. And if you say, I don't care what the candidate pool is, he's one of us, hire him. That's myopic. You have to be able to see what's out there. Look, I think Antonio Pierce, I've said it numerous times. People want to tell me I hate the guy. What? I've given him nothing but credit. But you look at the way he ended 5-4, 3-1 in the AFC West. Those wins against the Giants, Tommy DeVito at quarterback, the Jets, Zach Wilson at quarterback, the Chargers, Easton Stick at quarterback, the Chiefs with Mahomes at quarterback, great win, and the Broncos with Jarrett Stidham. Lost to Mahomes, Tua, Dobbs, Mullins, and Minshew. And the only reason I bring that up is not to belittle the wins. It's to talk about how in every situation, Mo, and I want your comment on this, there's pros and cons to every candidate. Doesn't matter who they are. Jim Harbaugh has his cons too. Most of the cons that people talk about with Jim Harbaugh aren't based in reality, but he has them, as does Antonio Pierce. So when you look at this situation, I understand fans, they're very excited. They feel like, as Murph said on the postgame, Mo, like the fans have come together around Antonio Pierce, and I get that. But in situations, just like with Rich Bisaccia, there's very similar but different situations. You're in a trauma, things are going poorly. Someone comes in, it's a breath of fresh air. He's a stand-up guy, a good leader, unlike Josh McDaniels. And of course, the Gruden thing was a weird deal. Of course, you're going to feel that way. How could you not feel that way? Now, if they'd gone 0-9, different story. I get it. But the reality was this team was never as bad as Josh McDaniels had them playing.
Yeah, I'll say this again. A lot of people had the Raiders winning 3 or 4 games.
Right.
And even under Josh McDaniels, they had already won 3 by the halfway point of the season. Right. And I said this roster is too talented to just finish the season at 3-14 or 4-13.
Right.
Remember, we had respectable reporters and writers who I respect say, where are the wins for the Raiders? Yeah. I don't see more than 2 to 3, 3 to 4. And covering the team, I said, look, you got Devontae Adams, you brought in Jacoby Myers, you got Josh Jacobs. I was assuming that Jimmy Garoppolo would look a lot better than he did. He didn't. So they moved on with Aiden O'Connell when Antonio Pierce took over. But still, the Raiders had too much offensive firepower. And then Patrick Graham brings together the defense the way it had been playing. Antonio Pierce adds on the swag. Now, we didn't anticipate Antonio Pierce taking over for Josh McDaniels, but it happened. So my point to bring up all of this is that he took a team that was 3-5. Antonio Pierce took a team that was 3-5, seemingly going nowhere. Gave it some juice, gave it some swagger. You have to give him some credit for that. And that's why I think he's earned, in my opinion, the number 2 spot behind Jim Harbaugh, simply because Jim Harbaugh has done it on both levels. There are very few resumes out there right now that compare to Jim Harbaugh. So this is not a knock against Antonio Pierce, but Jim Harbaugh has one of the best coaching resumes out there, college to pro. Now, I would say Antonio Pierce, being the leader of men that he's shown to be, he has the buy-in of the players. We saw development under Antonio Pierce on the defensive side of the ball. We saw Trey Tucker get more involved. We saw Michael Mayer get more involved. We started to see more creative play calling. Even with Bo Hardegree, I think Antonio Pierce has the ear of Bo Hardegree when it comes to the vision of the offense. We talked about that during the season, that even though Antonio Pierce isn't calling plays, he could definitely pull Bo Hardegree aside and make some suggestions. I think his suggestions were in there because at times the Raiders were aggressive, and I think that's part of what Antonio Pierce brings to a football team if he is the head coach. So the style of coaching, the player development, the player buy-in, 5-4. I think that game was important for him to win on Sunday, ending 5-4. I think all of that plays in Antonio Pierce's favor, and that's why. And I said this on the X. I said, while Jim Harbaugh is my number 1 option, I think Antonio Pierce is the most realistic option and a very good one. It's not, I wouldn't say it's settling. It's still, to me, a good option. Again, pending who he wants as his offensive coordinator, because it's going to be an important job for the Raiders going forward.
Right. And I don't disagree. I think he's a finalist. I've said that all along, especially on Sunday when they won. But I will say this too. It's much different coming in relief as it is starting and running the entire program. We don't know. Now, I'm not saying look at John Harbaugh in Baltimore. John Harbaugh didn't have any head coaching experience or defensive coordinator position experience either. But that's one outlier. It usually doesn't happen. And I've said it over and over again. And there's always exceptions. I get that. But if you look at situations similar to this, every other time that the coach has been retained as the permanent head coach, it's never worked out. The only example of it working out was Jason Garrett. Okay. So you look at that, and I go back to your point that you have to look at the available candidate pool. I'm obviously on the record saying that if Jim Harbaugh wants to come to the Raiders and they can come to an agreement, that would be the first choice on my end too. That is not an indictment of Antonio Pierce. Okay. But the dishonesty in the equation, if you just say, hey, I want him, I don't care about anything else, whatever, fine. But the dishonesty of reasons why people don't want Jim Harbaugh, there's plenty of reasons why you don't want him. Cost, this, that. But so much of it is conjecture based on stuff that doesn't matter. I had people tell me that Jim Harbaugh hasn't done anything because he hasn't won a championship. That's ignoring everything. So if you judge that, then Antonio Pierce is disqualified as well. He has not won a championship either. So you can't throw that stuff around. It's got to be equitable as far as if you're going to compare people to one another, you just compare their resumes. That's it. That's what you have to do. Now, Mark Davis makes this decision, Mo. And before we go to the break here, he's going to have to do it. This is going to be a topic of discussion until he makes a choice. He's got to go through the Rooney Rule process. Okay. But my guess is, even if Jim Harbaugh is interested, I think Mark Davis is a feel-good guy. I think he'll hire Antonio Pierce. I do. I don't think it's the right approach, but we'll have to see how it goes out. When you look at this process, how do you think it goes down?
If you're asking me today, I think Antonio Pierce gets the job simply because, as I said, I think he's the most realistic option right now. He seems pretty confident because he said after the game, see you next season, basically. Devontae Adams kind of said the same thing. So maybe it's speaking, hoping to speak something into existence, as they say.
Sure.
But one thing I will note, though, with this whole Jim Harbaugh versus Antonio Pierce discussion debate, there are a lot of people who are either or people.
Right.
Where if I like this candidate, I have to dislike the other candidate, and that's not where I am. And I think that's where a lot of people come at it from. Where
correct.
If I like Antonio Pierce, I have to dislike Jim Harbaugh. If I like Jim Harbaugh, I have to dislike Antonio Pierce. I'll say this again. I think it's 1 and 2. Harbaugh 1, Pierce
Right.
2. I like both candidates for different reasons. I wouldn't be upset if Mark Davis hired either one of those guys.
Right.
But I'm choosing the guy who's turned around every program he's been with. He turned around San Diego. Jim Harbaugh turned around San Diego. He turned around Stanford. He turned around the 49ers. He turned around Michigan. So he has a record of turning around programs and not just taking 4 years to do it. He's done it in 1-2 years at each stop.
Yep.
So for the fans who are worried about a long rebuild, Harbaugh has not only turned around programs, but he's done it in 1 to 2 years. So if you follow that pattern, you wouldn't be looking at a 3-4 year plan. You would be hoping that he could do it again at another stop and turn it around by the end of 2024, early 2025. So I would say if you're in the camp of Antonio Pierce, fine. If you're in the camp of Jim Harbaugh, fine. But just because you back one head coaching candidate doesn't mean that you have to hate or dislike the other one.
Correct. And that's the thing too. I found so much of the rumor mill stuff. That's what people are basing their opinion on why Harbaugh was a bad option. A bad option. He's not even worth it because he was run out of San Francisco. Well, no, him and the CEO didn't get along. If you don't get along with your boss, it doesn't matter how good of a job you're doing, right? Because you don't have a relationship. Relationships are everything. So read, even if you are in the Antonio Pierce camp, just go read about the history of Jim Harbaugh, what he's done and why he left San Francisco and how he inherited. I had somebody tell me, well, he inherited so-and-so's team and that's who he took to the Super Bowl. No, he inherited a 6-10 team, 6-10. And the next year, the very first year, 2011, went to the NFC Championship game and was coach of the year. That's not right. That's not the Gruden coattail thing in Tampa. That's a whole different thing. He didn't walk into a team that was ready to go. He had to go in there and turn things around, and he did. So we'll see. But we're going to talk lots about this in the coming weeks, I'm sure, Mo. So we'll move off from this, but we're going to go ahead and take our first break. When we come back here on Silver and Black today, we're going to talk about the 2023 Raiders expectations. Mo talked about how a lot of people picked them to win 2 or 3 games. We're going to talk about that as we roll on with this Tuesday edition. You're with Scott and Mo. This is Silver and Black today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, Silver and Black. Today, we're looking back at the 2023 season since it's now in the books. Week 18 is complete. The Raiders, of course, go out on top. They win and get within 1 win of getting over 500 since you can't be 500 anymore in the NFL. You have to be either 8-9 or 9-8. They were 8-9, and we're talking about expectations. Did they meet them? Did they surpass them? What happened? I am Scott Gulbransen. I'm joined by Moe Moton, my co-host. We are here talking Raiders football. Do us a favor. Make sure you follow Mo up on x.com. Keep him company. He gets lonely sometimes. MOEMOTON. I am at LV Gully. The show is SNB Today. Okay, Mo, we talked about it a little bit in the first segment, but I predicted 7 wins. I think you predicted 6 or 7 wins, right? So this team wins 8 games, which when they were sitting there at 3-5 and they jettisoned Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler, who knew what was going to happen, right? You expected a bump a couple games because when you have a coaching switch like that, usually it goes that way. But the fact that the Raiders finished 1 game over 500, the final 9 games of the season was encouraging. We saw the defensive progress, which was on full display Sunday against the Broncos. Again, Malcolm Kuntz's growth, Divine Diablo's growth, Robert Spillane's growth has been fantastic. In my view, this team, with the exception of the offense, which we'll get to in a second separately, this team overall at 8-9 surpassed my expectations because of how well that defense developed.
All right, surpassed my expectations too because I was in the 6 or 7 wins camp, so they were 1 win better than what I expected. Still in the same ballpark, but again, no one predicted that Antonio Pierce would take over for Josh McDaniels. So I don't know what I would have predicted had I known that Josh McDaniels would get fired halfway through. But it just goes back to my point about this team being better than a basement dwelling 3-4 win team, which a lot of people thought the Raiders were. And maybe a lot of that is attached to Josh McDaniels' little faith in Josh McDaniels. I understand that. But it's clear that this team, I don't want to say it's one piece away from a Super Bowl contender, but it shows that this team is not, one of the bottom feeding teams in the league, assuming that they keep a lot of their key parts. Now, Josh Jacobs, may go elsewhere in free agency. He has an expiring contract. We'll see about that. But looking at the defense, and I think it's important to note that Patrick Graham is probably going to go on some interviews this offseason.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think he'll get a head coaching job, but I do think he'll get some interviews. If Antonio Pierce isn't retained, he may make a lateral move if he's not on board with the new head coach. I don't want to say not on board, but if the new head coach wants a different defensive coordinator, he could be elsewhere. So I sincerely hope that Patrick Graham is retained, simply because we haven't seen a Raider defense this good statistically in terms of total yards and scoring in 2 decades. So this Raider defense has carried this team through a lot of the season. There were times where, and we'll talk about the offense, there were times where Aiden O'Connell wasn't on target. The offense wasn't scoring for stretches, long stretches, and the defense scored touchdowns. And that's how they beat the Kansas City Chiefs in Arrowhead. Is mostly the defense scoring 2 defensive touchdowns in Arrowhead. So while I'm optimistic about the defense and the growth of guys like Malcolm Kuntz and even Tyree Wilson, who didn't have a massive jump in from between the first half of the season and the second half of the season, had some bright moments. And there's some moments where I can say, okay, Tyree Wilson could become a starter and a player who can play inside and outside and give the Raiders a push up front. I'm encouraged by a lot of what I've seen on defense. My only worry, as I said, is that they lose Patrick Graham and they bring in a new coordinator and things kind of have to reshuffle for that side of the ball. And then you're going to have guys maybe having to fit into another scheme and having to learn a new scheme and get used to playing in that scheme. And then you may have some drop off. But for the most part, you could see the young pieces on that side of the ball. You could see Robert Spillane being the centerpiece of that defense. And I think they still need another linebacker. But you're even encouraged by guys like Trayvon Merrick, who had the game-sealing interception on Sunday. And still Nate Hobbs, Jones being a mid-season pickup off the waiver wire. There are a lot of good things going on that side of the ball. I just hope that they don't take a step back with the new defensive coordinator.
Well, and they might not have a choice too, Mo. You talk about him, Patrick Graham, that is interviewing for head coaching positions and perhaps not getting them quite yet. And I agree with you on that one. But no one's to say he wouldn't make a lateral move. And you say, well, why would he make a lateral move? And it goes back to what we were talking about with the head coaching situation. That is relationships. There's numerous jobs already open. Washington, Atlanta, whoever gets those jobs, you don't know how the connection. So they might be connected in some way. And that would make Patrick Graham say, hey, you know what? I'm going to go there because I know this guy and I want to, I'm in with him, get more money. Who knows? But that's something people can't forget.
One quick note. How do you think the Raiders got Patrick Graham? He made a lateral move from the Giants to the Raiders.
Right.
I guess he felt like that staff the Raiders had was more of a line of what he wanted to be a part of. So Patrick Graham didn't go from a position coach to the Raiders defensive coordinator. He was the defensive coordinator to the Giants, and he made a lateral move to the Raiders. So it's possible that he can make another lateral move, again, if he feels like there's a better situation with another coaching staff. Go ahead, Scott.
Yes, and I know we'll get into more in-depth analysis of the season and play, especially with players and units. But we'll finish talking about in this segment the offense, because the offense, again, we talked about it last show, Mo, it's broken, right? The system is broken. You have a lot of the right pieces. We talked about Devontae Adams. We talk about the offensive line needing some supplement there. They need some depth. They need some, maybe at least one player there, and maybe Dylan Parham moves over to center. Not maybe. I think it's pretty much almost guaranteed he's going to move to center with Andre James being a free agent. So you look at this situation and you look at the offense, it all comes back again to the same thing, which is quarterback. Now, Aiden O'Connell had a great game against the Broncos. The Broncos, the 30th ranked defense. I'm not poo-pooing his effort. He did good. He executed, but they're the 30th ranked defense. So the offensive line gave him more time. We talked about functional mobility, Mr. Moe Moton, and in Sunday's game, he didn't have to be that mobile because the protection was there. It was the Tom Brady example. When your line is just killing the other side, you have plenty of time. You don't need to move around. When he had to move around, he got sacked or the plays broke down. So this goes back to the need for a quarterback. I had people tell me yesterday, curse me out, that Aiden O'Connell is the number one quarterback going into next year. There's no question. He doesn't need to compete. I'm like, I don't know what people are watching. Aiden O'Connell is a good quarterback. He's developing into a good pro quarterback. And I think he is incredibly valuable because you have to have a good second string quarterback who can win games for you. And that's Aiden O'Connell.
Why are people so hyperbolic about everything, Scott?
really sensitive about everything. I mean, I talked about the turf on Sunday, and people were. I had a guy who's a turf manager at the University of South Dakota go nuts on me and say, "We don't know what you're talking about. How do you know about?" Excuse me, I don't know about being the president of the United States, but I sometimes comment on how he's doing.
Because I got some of that with Aiden O'Connell. I had a post on the X, and I said, looking at Aiden O'Connell from where he started against in that Chargers game where he had, where he was terrorized by Khalil Mack basically the entire game,
Yes.
to what he ended up as in this final game against the Denver Broncos, I saw the development, I saw the growth, I saw the progress. And it was evident when he had a bad game. It seemed like after a bad game, he would bounce back. So we remember the Minnesota Vikings game where he scored 0 points. He bounces back. We remember the Chiefs game where he didn't complete a pass after the first quarter, and he bounces back. So
Yeah.
I like this. I like
Great.
that he showed development. He showed resilience.
Yes.
He was injured on Sunday where he had an index finger injury, comes back in the game and finishes a pretty solid outing against the Denver Broncos defense. I'll bet wherever they're ranked, it's still commendable that he was able to do that. So
Correct.
I said, Aiden O'Connell looks like a solid quality number 2 quarterback. He could be the long-term backup for the Raiders. And there were people out there who took that as a slight against Aiden O'Connell. Oh, what do you mean? He was the best rookie quarterback behind CJ Stroud in his rookie class. He should be in the running for, starting quarterback. And I'm like, listen, I just said that Aiden O'Connell, I like the development in O'Connell. That's what you want as a back out of a backup quarterback. But you are not passing on the entire 2024 draft class to crown Aiden O'Connell as your starting quarterback. My guy Damon, who works at the Draft Network, said whoever passes on the 2024 draft class to start Aiden O'Connell week 1 deserves to be fired. And he's right. You're not passing. This is arguably going to be the best quarterback draft class in a very long time. You're not passing up on all of those prospects, Khalid Williams, Drake May, Jayden Daniels, Michael Penix Jr., Bo Nix, Cam Ward, whoever you like. You're not passing up on those guys to say, Aiden O'Connell is our starting quarterback for 2024. No way. Now, can Aiden O'Connell compete for the job? In the best case scenario, yes. You're not moving on from Aiden O'Connell. He's not going anywhere. You're just adding another young prospect to hopefully win the job. And if that young prospect doesn't win the job and Aiden O'Connell makes this massive leap, so be it. But you're not passing on the entire class because Aiden O'Connell had a solid finish as a quarterback with limitations. By the way, I noted that he has some limitations, but he was good as a fill-in starter coming in halfway through the season. But again, you're not passing on the 2024 class for O'Connell.
And if you look at the comparison that the person made to you, second behind CJ Stroud. Okay, let's not even get into that game because CJ Stroud had twice as many yards, twice as many touchdowns. I mean, it's not. You're a far second. And the rookie class, Will Levis didn't do much. He had a couple flashes here and there. Didn't play as much as Aiden O'Connell did, by the way, too. So it wasn't a great quarterback class last year. Bryce Young is the only one at the top of the draft that was, quote unquote, a disappointment. I think that had a lot to do with where he's at. But nonetheless, that's where it is. So this is the point, though, Mo. This is where you talked about it with the coaching situation. Not everything is absolute. And because you like a guy and because the Raiders were one game over. I had somebody tell me that the Chiefs win was the biggest win, one of the biggest wins in franchise history. Like, what? It was a regular season game. It was a big win for this year. Don't get me wrong. I'm not taking anything away from it. It was massive on Christmas Day. It was a great win. But you're going to tell me, is it better than a playoff win that you haven't had in 21 years, 22 years now? No. This absolute, just this hyperbolic, as you mentioned, it's just crazy with people. And I just think, though, that this team is on the right foot. They have the right foundation on defense. If you lose Patrick Graham, it doesn't mean your defense falls apart. If you don't have Antonio Pierce, doesn't mean that the team falls apart and it's a 2 or 3 year rebuild. That's not how it goes. Either with Pierce as coach or without Pierce as coach, this team has gotten better. They're not that far away. And so I think people just need to realize that and feel good about it.
I think there's a bit of recency bias or prisoner of the moment syndrome. I want to call it.
Prisoner of the moment. I like that.
When people want to tab Aiden O'Connell as their starter for the 2024 season, I just shake my head and I think, while he did show progress, Do you not remember the Vikings game?
Yeah.
Do you not remember the Chiefs game? As I said, in the Chiefs game, Aiden O'Connell didn't complete a pass after the first quarter.
Right.
Now while I love to see the development and the bounce back and the resiliency from him, there are clear warts there and not enough to again prevent you from drafting a quarterback. I made this post on X2. I said, if you're a team that doesn't have your franchise quarterback or you have questions about your starter, get a quarterback this offseason.
Yes,
That's all there is to it. You're not hitching your wagon to a questionable starter or a guy who you clearly don't believe is the franchise guy. No matter what, the Raiders should draft a quarterback. I just want to make that point very clear.
Yes. And the other thing there too is I just think a lot of this, and this is not a criticism because again, people's time, look, life is too short to waste your time on things that you don't need to be doing. But a lot of this comes from, I don't think people watch a lot of football outside of their own team. And that's fine. Like I said, that's fine. So your team plays you've seen the other teams your team plays. So if you're a Raider fan, you watch the Raider game. So you see two teams every week. But if you watch quarterbacks and if you watch what they're doing around the league, you clearly know the Raiders don't have their answer yet. It's not even close. I mean, you watch the game, even the Dolphins who did so well, Tua, still question marks on Tua, right? Even though he did so well at the beginning of the year, you saw the game with the Bills on Sunday night. So again, you're right, Mo. You got to go get your quarterback, and that's it. But I do think, as you mentioned, and we agree, excuse me, the Raiders did surpass expectations. So now the bar goes up for next year. You won 8 games this year with a good draft, with your coaching situation, your GM situation. You would expect the Raiders to be fully in the range of qualifying for the playoffs as either a wild card team or for the AFC West. All right, we're going to end this segment. We're going to come back and finish up the show real quick. We're going to talk a little more about what's to come for the Raiders. You're on Silver and Black today with Scott and Mo, and we're coming right back at you. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back, Silver and Black today. Home stretch here. Final segment of this Tuesday edition in early January. The season now over for the Raiders. They finish 8-9. Scott Gulbransen, Moe Moton. Mo is the senior NFL writer over at Bleacher Report. Follow him on X at MOEMOTON. That's Moe Moton. I am at LV Gully. We love talking to you as long as you're not crazy. Right, Mo? There's a lot of crazies out there.
That's right.
And I don't mind, like, you know what, Mo? Like, disagree with me. You and I disagree all the time. And like Murph was disagreeing with him. It's all good. I like to learn from people who have different points of view. But when you call me an a-hole or you call me an idiot, it's very easy just to hit block and I don't have to deal with you anymore. Because if you have a great argument and I'm wrong, fine, great, cool. I'll admit that. But if you're going to be an idiot, don't do it. But we don't have idiots that listen to the show. We have the best listeners, best viewers on YouTube, as you can see from the chat. The chat is always off the hook and great. So thank you guys for doing that. Mo, the plan for the offseason, we talked about it before, but I want to reiterate something really surprising. And that is the Raiders need a quarterback, right? And you're looking at the draft. You talked about the draft last segment. The Raiders have to do whatever they can. You mentioned after the games were completed on Sunday, some of the teams now who've basically tipped their hand about their quarterback situation. The Cardinals, for example, Kyler Murray, they're building around Kyler Murray. We don't know about the Bears yet with Justin Fields. It's kind of 50-50 there. We'll see what happens. But talk everybody through that, what you see at the top of the top 10 of the draft and where the Raiders could possibly find a partner to trade up there to get the quarterback they so desperately need.
So yesterday I pinpointed 2 trade spots for the Raiders. Number 4, Arizona. You just mentioned the Cardinals, I believe. Reports are, and Jonathan Gannon said this. This is not me with rumor mill conjecture. Jonathan Gannon said, we're going to build around Kyler Murray. So the Cardinals are going to be open for business. I understand they may be interested in Marvin Harrison Jr. to pair with Kyler Murray for a decade plus. I understand that, but that doesn't stop me from calling the Cardinals and offering a package for them and seeing if they're interested in moving back. Because there aren't any other Marvin Harrisons in this draft, but there are some other top tier wide receivers who are going to be in this draft in the first round. So I would call the Cardinals first at 4. And I would make a call to the Giants at 6. A report came out on Sunday. Mike Garofalo of NFL Network said, seems like the Giants are going to stick with Daniel Jones. So that means they're going to be open for business. I understand they need offensive linemen to protect Daniel Jones. But again, that's not going to stop me from calling the Giants and offering them a trade package so I can move up and get my quarterback. Now, beyond 4 with the Cardinals and 6 with the Giants, I would say you make a call to the Tennessee Titans. see what they're doing, see what their interest is, and sticking with maybe Will Levis because Ryan Tannehill is going to be out of there. But maybe they move on. Who knows? No one knows what's going to happen with Tennessee Titans. We don't even know what's going to go on with their head coach because there were rumors that Mike Vrabel may not be back. Now, I think he should be back after what they did to the Jaguars on Sunday. But who knows? We don't know what Rand Carthon, the GM of the Titans, is going to do. You make that call at 7. The Atlanta Falcons the Falcons fired their head coach, Arthur Smith, 1 minute after midnight. 1 or 2 minutes after. They couldn't wait to get him out of the door. So the Falcons are going to have new direction at head coach. They obviously need a quarterback. Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke were both turnover machines. A lot of people are connecting them, including myself, to Justin Fields. We'll see. If they go the veteran quarterback route, let's say it's Kirk Cousins. If he leaves Minnesota, who knows? They could be open for business at 8. The Chicago Bears, if they draft their quarterback at 1, they have another first-round pick at 9. So they'll definitely be open for business at 9 if you want to jump into the top 10. I think the Bears spot would be key for the Raiders if they're not able to get the Cardinals to move, if they're not able to get the Giants or Titans or Falcons to move. I think the Bears could be a spot for the Raiders to jump up a couple of spots. Because remember, before the Raiders, Denver needs a quarterback. The Vikings may need a quarterback. I don't think the Jets are going to draft a quarterback, but I think it's important for the Raiders at 13 to move ahead of the Denver Broncos and Minnesota Vikings. So that's why I look at the Bears at 9 as a good spot for the Raiders, because you want to move ahead, again, of those quarterback-needed teams in Denver and Minnesota.
Yeah, although I will say, and I know a lot of people ridiculed me for it, but I do think, and I know you're in New York, you have a better beat on it than I do. I wouldn't be surprised if the Jets did, though, because I know Aaron Rodgers, he might have a year or 2 left. And you said how this draft is, either you're going to trade out and get a ton of value, or if one of those quarterbacks is there, why would you not take them unless you're absolutely set? If you're a Buffalo, if you're a Kansas City, I get it. You're not going to touch a quarterback. You don't need to. You got your guy for long term. But the teams that don't have long-term quarterbacks, like the Giants and others, I still think could be in play, just as a surprise. I'm not saying it's going to happen. It's probably under a 10% chance, but it could happen. But to your point, the Raiders got to take a big swing. They should have done it last year with CJ Stroud. We've been down that road before. But with this class, they've got to do it. If they don't do it, it's a bad sign. And I can't imagine any GM that would come into the Raider organization. By the way, Champ Kelly, who I advocated to get the job full-time, is interviewing for 2 other jobs. So even if the Raiders want to hire him, doesn't mean he's going to stay there. He might jump for another opportunity. So there's going to be lots of change. Let's close out talking about some player change. I talked about Andre James earlier, but of course the 2 big ones, Josh Jacobs, Hunter Renfrow. I don't see any possibility. I know you said in previous weeks, well, if Antonio Pierce is back, maybe Josh Jacobs comes back. That's not a relationship thing. This is a purely business decision. I just don't see anybody coming in. And yes, especially with the performance of Zamir White down the stretch, Mo, it's not anything against Josh Jacobs, but he was out the final 4 games, injury. You can't control injury. He's missed games due to injury throughout his short career, despite his great performance. So I just don't see them bringing him back. And the same with Hunter Renfrow. Obviously, the writing's on the wall there too, with these 2 guys.
The writing's been on the wall for Hunter Renfrow. I talked about it last offseason. I talked about it during the season. I was like, it's only a matter of time. Now he's stuck, and I'm surprised he stuck with the team through this year. But it's clear that Hunter Renfrow is not in the future plans. I think Trey Tucker at this point offers more in terms of explosive plays. We saw it yesterday. He had a 47-yard reception from Aiden O'Connell. Aiden O'Connell rainbows it through the air. Trey Tucker comes down with it. I like to see those big explosive plays over the top. That's what the Raiders offense really needs outside of Devontae Adams. So it's clear that Trey Tucker is the future in the slot. So Hunter Renfrow they're probably going to move on from Hunter Renfrow. I wouldn't be surprised if Hunter Renfrow winds up in New Orleans somehow, where they manipulate the cap or reunite Carr and Hunter Renfrow. Just look out for that. As you said, Zamir White has shown over the past month, and I was wrong about Zamir White. Shout out to Rossi down under, who's a big Zamir White guy. But I was wrong about Zamir White. He actually showed that he can be the feature back in the backfield. He just needed some time and volume. Josh Jacobs hasn't been available. Zamir White has stepped in, had over 100 yards. I believe he had 112 yards Sunday against the Broncos on 25 carries, averaging over 4 yards per carry. Again, that's what I say is the magic number, averaging over 4 yards per carry. Zamir White has shown it, and I think that makes Josh bendable this offseason.
Yeah, it sure does. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that running back room too, because I think Zamir White's your starter going into camp. And then we'll see if they get somebody late in the draft or they pick up some free agents. But I think they're in a good spot with him. I was really impressed, and I was wrong with him on him too, Mo. We admit when we're wrong, and certainly you guy gets a chance again, just like Aiden O'Connell had a chance to play this year as well. That was important. So when you have a down year like the Raiders sort of had, at least throughout most of it until the end, you want to see what you have, and that's what the Raiders were able to do. Well, now it's time to say goodbye to us as we come to the close of this edition of Silver and Black today. Mo, anything you want to tell people about you got coming up this week?
I have no Bleacher Report lives until January 18th, taking a break to digest the Raiders season and just go through some material. We're going to talk a lot about trade targets and head coaching interviews when I'm back on the airwaves at Bleacher Report. But I will say, while we're on air, my colleague over at Bleacher Report, Jordan Schultz, said that the Raiders head coaching job is a two-horse race between Antonio Pierce and Jim Harbaugh. I just wanted to note that Jordan Schultz is the Bleacher Report's NFL insider. He's actually doing a live as I speak to you, Scott. So I'm not on live, but Jordan Schultz is, and he's dropping gems.
Jordan's great.
And he says it's a two-horse race.
Yeah.
So this is why I said Jim Harbaugh is probably the long shot because he's going to have so many other teams courting him. But I think Antonio Pierce is the most realistic and very good option for the Raiders.
Yep, we'll see how it all goes down, and I think those are two good options. Look, you have one's riskier than the other for one reason, and the other's risky for a different reason. So, and that is longevity. People want to point at Harbaugh not staying very long at certain places. That's because he's used his ability to rebuild and then move on to bigger challenges. The only thing he has left in his life now to do is win a Super Bowl. So he wants to go where he's going to win a Super Bowl, and so we'll see where he ends up. But it's going to be a fun discussion either way here on Silver and Black today as well. Make sure you check out all Mo's work up on Bleacher Report, even if it's not Raider related. Also, go make sure you check out sportsnaut.com where you can catch both Mo and I. We both contribute right there, as well as hosting videos. Check out the Nod Zone, our NFL show. Me and Ryan Dyrud from the LA Football Network on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. Hope you guys enjoy that. Anyway, Mo, take care, man. We will see you later in the week.
See you later in the week. Maybe we have some more head coaching news. Who knows?
Maybe, just maybe. All right. For our producer, Mike Robier from Moe Moton, I am Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black today. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you on Thursday.